Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Founders Chair podcast. Andy Goldberg here. Very, very pleased to welcome onto the show today Ron Young from Contract Bottlers Glasgow. Ron, welcome to the Founders Chair.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Really excited to hear about your story today, Ron. Can you just tell us, first of all, just a little bit about you, the person, a little bit about you personally, where you're from, what you get up to when you're not at work?
Okay, well, according to my wife, I'm never not at work. I'm an old git. I'm 57. So long checkered past, mainly booze. So Scotch Newcastle. Started way back when I was a student in Oddbins. Um, Period with Kodak, then into Scotch Newcastle. Beer trade. Then I wanted to get back into wine, so I ran a contract bottling business for Scotch Newcastle in Waverley, bulk shipping wine. That got me into contract bottling. And then after that, I ran a business called H&A Prestige in Chorley for Halewood International, which was a contract bottling business doing spirits. So that's kind of where I learned my trade, if you will. Um, I have got three daughters, a wife, and even the dog's bitch. So fairly outnumbered. So as I say, when I'm not working, it tends to be just kind of doing a bit of
Yeah.
sweeping up after the women in my life, as they say.
Wow, three daughters. I've got one, and that's enough to cause me to lose all my hair.
Well, I was going to say mine's probably a bit more advanced than
You're
yours.
going three times the pace. Fantastic. And so tell us a little bit, Ron. Tell us a story about what, how the business came about, and what gave you the confidence to think that you could run your own business. You'd obviously had a strong career, a lot of industry experience, a lot of management experience, but owning a business is different. So did you think that at the time, or were you just quite happy to
Yeah,
get?
well, so basically, I when I left Halewood, I went into consultancy. So I did a lot of work, just as a hired gun, for want of a better description. Project work, integration, cost chain analysis, and stuff like that. For various wine and spirits companies, did a lot of work for a lot of spirits companies, and I kind of saw the growth of the small distillery, which everybody talks about, but obviously I was kind of living and breathing it, and having run H&A, which was a big spirits bottling business. It was a great business. I actually approached Halewood about buying it, but the multiples they were looking for were crazy, and they actually shut that part of their business anyway. But effectively, what I got to a point in my life with consultancy, good money, interesting projects. Um, and I actually developed Edinburgh Gin and Tonic for them, and rhubarb and ginger, which again kind of came into CBG in its infancy. So basically, problem with consultancy is you've got no asset except yourself. You've got no pension pot except what you pay into it. Um, Everybody had always said to me, well, particularly my best friend always said to me, why do you always run somebody else's business? You're so good at it. Why don't you do it yourself? And it's kind of like, kids, school fees, mortgages, lifestyle, all these things, conspired against it. But my youngest is now, well, at the time she was 11, so she was in secondary. The other two were sort of into their further education. So it was kind of like, well, if I don't do it at 50, I'm never going to do it. So I sat down, wrote a business plan. Um, Basically, I knew I needed investors. I didn't know how to start a business. Nobody ever does. There was me sitting there at 50 years old. And basically, I met my now business partner for a cup of coffee in the Costa in Sauchiehall Street with a business plan. He'd sold his family business and was a sort of angel investor. So I thought, well, I'll run my business plan past him, see what he reckons, and just, get a gauge. So sat down, had a cup of coffee, showed him the business plan. He said, I'm in. I'm like, "Oh, sorry." And he just said, no, I'm in. So October 2019, basically, sorry, 2018, I beg your pardon. October 2018, he says, right, I'm in. Let's go get a bank account. Let's go and get some finance. Let's go and see Scottish Enterprise. Do all this because he did run a family business. So his background was very different from mine. He kind of knew all the wee levers. Um, So basically, we incorporated December 2019 and sorry, 2018, I beg your pardon. And we opened doors March 19. Um, and that's what kind of kicked it off. So, I I had confidence in myself, I guess, but the nervousness was I'd never done it for myself. I'd done it for other people. Um, and the reality of running your own business is incredibly different from running somebody else's business with management teams and structures and HR and all the nice bits and pieces. But as I say, that was March 19. We started with 4 people. We're now at 22 people. We started with 2 units. We're now at 3 units and potentially looking at 4 units. We started with one bottling line. We've now got 2 bottling lines and a canning line. So it's all kind of grown organically,
Yeah.
by a lot of door knocking and a lot of hard work from the team.
Faster than you expected, or the right pace, or is it going according to plan, or are you surprised?
Listen, it's funny because again, as I say, I'm an old git. So, you watch Dragon's Den and, everybody's going to be a millionaire in 10 minutes and, all they need is £1 million to get there. The harsh reality of it is the business plan is written with a view to getting investors on board, getting banks on board, getting structures in place. And it is a plan. But if I'm honest, it was torn up
Sure.
within a year. So the canning line was never in the plan. Now I had launched for Ian McLeod Edinburgh Gin and Tonic, Rhubarb and Ginger, which are kind of the top end premium gin and tonic red RTDs. So we thought, right, well, we'll look at a canning line. So we looked at canning line and we kind of went there. Yeah, there's got to be opportunity here because if you think about the dynamic, then so you're talking probably 2021 by this stage. No, it'd be 2020. Just before lockdown, we were thinking about it, and then coming out of lockdown into 2021, we really got very serious about it, and we looked at the market, and basically the thought process being if it works for Edinburgh Gin and Tonic, which is a big brand, and they put 26 pallets of stock on the floor, but sold out in 2 weeks and
Mm.
couldn't get production for 6 months. The thought process was that this could work. So, again, it's kind of a lesson to any other sort of business owners. It seemed like a good idea. So we put in the canning line to do RTDs. And I thought genuinely, we would have a queue of whiskey distilleries queuing up outside going, oh, great, whiskey and sodas, etc. We'll come to you. You can do it in Scotland. It's fantastic. Nah, it was a bit of gin and tonic. So you get nervous about that. Then we decided, right, we'll put a pasteurizer on. So there's 2 ways to preserve product in can. There's pasteurization and there's a product called Velcrin which kills the bacteria that grow. So we chose pasteurization. And I mean, to be honest with you, that was a complete game changer. But this time we're in 2022, so again, business plan was one wee line. We're already into two lines, one being a canning. So you're talking probably another 500,000's worth of investment in the canning line, with a pasteurizer on it. We put the pasteurizer in. It was meant to come in February 2022. Supplier let us down. It eventually got there in September 22. And the pasteurizer came in and basically, we'd missed the canning season by that point. So canning is February to September and it came in September. So we pretty much missed that year. So, a lot of heartache, a lot of pain, a lot of investment had gone in. It was ticking along. It was doing bits and bobs, but really hadn't locked in.
Yeah.
And then 2023, we, I used LinkedIn a lot. I put quite a lot of content on LinkedIn because again, I'm an old git. So the way I look at it is that's a good business to business. And with LinkedIn, I always said, listen, I'll connect to people who are either going to give me business because I am a salesman at the end of the day, or if they've worked with me, for me, whatever, I would recommend them. So I see LinkedIn as like an endorsement to say,
Mm.
good guy, um, should worth talking to, sort of thing. So basically, we talked about the pasteurizer and stuff like that, and all of a sudden we started getting quite a lot of interest about soft drinks. Now we're an alcohol business, but we suddenly start getting some interest in soft drinks. So effectively, the pasteurizer was a complete game changer. So in 2023, the numbers started really going up and up and up. Um, then in 2024, we actually had a fire in the pasteurizer. The boiler went on fire, and we were just starting to get busy. Um, and again, kind of a lesson about, running your own business. You don't plan for these things. These things happen. And
Yeah.
by God, they are painful. So we lost 8 days of production. We just engaged with a number of new customers. We were letting them down. But again, I'm a big believer in deliver bad news fast. Good news can always wait. So talk to the customer, tell them what's happening, tell them what you're going to do about it, make it happen, keep engaged with them. So we got back up and running with that. And it was really after the fire. So this is February 24. I beg your pardon, this is February 23. Basically, the numbers start to climb and climb and climb and climb. And what we learned very quickly is there was a lot of bad canners in the market, and we really strive to be the best at everything we do. So contract bottlers were created to be super niche, support growth, enable, help the small distilleries grow. We've built a really good reputation in line one doing that. So we want to do the same with canning. And basically, we invested a lot in things like X-ray equipment to make sure the seam was good. And because of my background with consultancy, what we try and do is we try and help customers. We do a fact sheet about the issues about canning to watch out for. There's a bit of consultancy thrown in there because, again, we don't want to be just a static production company. We want to be, a value chain ad. So basically, that's where, we really are very, very different, both on bottling and in canning, in that we try and help people. So, I mean, effectively, that really grew. So, again, that's us into 2022 with a canning line and a bottling line. So, the next stage of growth was again 2022 when whiskey was very high in sort of April, May 2022, coming out of COVID. Whiskey was really flying as a category. Gin had moved from gin liqueur to flavored gins and London dries, quite well established. So we're doing a lot of gin. And we've been really lucky on bottling line one. We came in 2019, and basically there was a lot of distilleries really just starting to scale at that time. So first customers were people like Glaswegian, who are local. They were in significant growth. They tried us out, sent us in an IBC of spirit. We bottled it. Then they said, actually, could you reduce it? And we reduced their bulk spirit and bottled it. And they said, well, could you compound the gin for us? Because they created gin essence back then, and then they made a gin from the gin essence. So it's a bit like, diluting orange. That's the important bit, and
Yeah.
it gives the gin the flavor. So we started doing that. They now distill in house completely. But again, as they were growing, we were growing with them. And again, that's where we talked about being enablers. So we're not a sexy branded business whereby, well, CBG is our brand, obviously, but we don't have any brands of our own, gin wise or whiskey wise. We are the enabler for these guys. So, two blokes at 50 years old, have a tagline of distilled with passion, bottled with love. That's, that was unusual back then. So, but we use an analogy of being like a kindergarten. So you can put your kid in any kindergarten, but you don't. You go and you meet the staff, you get comfortable with them, you see the art in the walls, you meet the teachers, and you go, oh, yeah, we Jimmy will be quite happy in there, so we'll put him there. And that's what we kind of wanted to get across to customers is, some of our scotches are like 35 years old. You don't entrust them with just anybody. There's got to be that understanding of how you look after something, and that goes for new distilleries with new make spirit, gins, vodkas to, as I say, 35-year-old scotches. We treat them all with the same duty of care, but again, the relationship is really important. And again, we bottle things like Ala Harris. I mean, it's a beautiful gin, great story, great brand, absolute right sort of ethos for developing a business, jobs in the island, good quality long-term jobs. And they launched their whiskey, and they didn't have the capacity of their gin and their whiskey, but it was a big decision for them, to move that spirit to somewhere else to bottle. And again, they didn't just go, oh, they'll do. They want to come and meet the team. And what we did was we did like almost like an exchange. So I went across to Harris, met their team, kind of explained that, we will take absolute care. They sent their bottling hall staff over here so they could see that, Bond and me packed him, that it was not just words. We actually meant what we said. Um,
Yeah.
so, again, that's how we've tried to run the business is, very much on a hand and glove relationship. We're part of their supply chain, an essential part.
You've got to get that trust in right away because they can't, your client can't afford to find out whether you're any good.
100%.
Right. So a lot of that's going to be around the relationship and the trust that you can convey right at the start.
Well, I mean, and again, our next investment was a fast bottling line, which we made in 2022. Or sorry, we decided in 2022, didn't install till 2023. And again, funnily enough, was late. Um, like everything in, post-COVID years, everything was delayed, and one equipment supplier said, "Oh, before we agree the price, can we just agree a mechanism for the fluctuation in price of steel, while we make the machine?" You're kind of going, "No, no, no, you agree a price." But yeah, so we put like line two, another £750,000 worth investment in. That we put in because we were almost outgrowing line one. We were so busy in line one, we were actually turning work away, which, I'm a sales guy. That's, it's so painful.
Yeah.
And, Adrian, my business partner, he sits across from me and, I'm busy saying yes to a customer. He's going, no, we can't do it, you know. But listen, small businesses, you always find a way. There's always a way to do it. And, that's the fundamental difference between a small business and, I've been PLCs, Scottish and Newcastle, you know, PLCs, nobody owns the business, right? So nobody cares that much. They have great relationships between customers and themselves, but nobody owns it. They can't see, who owns that pen, who owns that desk, who owns that machine. Whereas owner managed businesses, I've learned since running my own businesses, they are absolutely the best because you have to care. You have to care. If you don't care, the business will not be successful.
Exactly.
Uh, it's
What's
just a
been
fact.
what's been your biggest learning as a business owner?
Um, Take people in your journey, probably. We might have the insight, the vision, if you will, of where the business can be, but if you don't take people on that journey, you'll never succeed it. Because, again, we're a manufacturing business, so we're very, very people reliant. And we started with 4 people with one line. We're now 2 bottling lines and a canning line and 22 people. Um, our staff retention is incredible. So,
Hmm.
we've got people that we brought in as apprentices, and both my business partner and I fully believe in. Well, I'll wind back a wee bit. So when we started up, we got Scottish End investment, and one of the things is, you have to have a inverted commas youth policy, and a lot of businesses go, oh yeah, we've got youth policy. They tick all the boxes and they do it. We've absolutely delivered it. So we brought guys in, 17 years old, first job as an apprentice, brought them up. One of them is now the vatting supervisor, and the other we just agreed last week. Basically, he's going to shadow our engineer, and he's going to move into that role to actually do the changeovers to free up the engineer to go and do actual, the things that we need the engineer to do, like fix machines. And it was great because I had the conversation with Lewis last week. I said, right, okay, so here's the letter. That's the job description. That's what we're going to try and do. Um, so you just sign that, and you'll get a salary increase at the end. And he says, "Well, let me think about it." I'm thinking, "Where's this coming from?" So off he comes back next day. I say, "Okay, Lewis, have you had a chance to think about it?" He says, "Yeah." He says, see that on 50%? How about 10%? I went, do you know, I really like your style. I said, but unfortunately, we've got to be fair to everybody, and everybody moves up when they get trained by the same level, sort of thing. But, again, talk about a reward. Again, you've taken a guy straight out of school, first job. He's gone through, that learning curve, and he's now got the confidence to do that. And, I think, we take great credit in that because, you know, Lewis will still be here, when I retire, if I ever do. And, basically he will move up through the organization, can tell. And, he couldn't manage people right now, but with an attitude like that, you can learn anything. And we've absolutely firmly believe in that. This business is about building people with it. So, we can develop people. If they want to learn, they'll learn. John, our engineer, who's fantastic. I mean, he's ex-bakery, he's not bottling. And, again, that's the point is you don't need to know about bottling line. You just need to know how to fix things. And you have to have the mentality, which is, well, we can't wait for a supplier to fix it. So we've got to get it done. And again, that's really I would say done us a lot of favors because he knows more about our canning line now probably than the manufacturer does because we fix our problems ourselves because it'll take us 4 days to get an engineer up. It'll cost us 400 quid an hour, sorry, a day and travel, and then 700 quid when you're here and you're going, these guys must be on millions. But you find a way, and that's kind of a small business mentality.
And you were saying earlier you've got to care. We teach in our company that your team is a reflection of you. So the level at which you care, the level of your own enthusiasm for your work and for your customers' success will be reflected in your team, no matter how young they are, right? So you're
Yeah.
basically creating future leaders. Who,
Well, and I was asked to put myself forward for Entrepreneur of the Year for Price Waterhouse. No, yeah, Price Waterhouse it was. So I did the document and stuff like that, and I went and I was sitting in a room with all these other entrepreneurs, and they were all .coms and stuff like that, and they were saying, "Oh yeah, we have 40 grand incentive to join and all this sort of stuff." And I said, "Well, I'm a manufacturing business, right? We do free tea and coffee, but we try and treat the guys well on the soft skills, you know. But again, it's kind of exactly as you say, if they don't buy into what we're trying to achieve, and it's tough in manufacturing because we it's not the highest paid jobs, but they're well paid jobs, and they are skilled jobs, or they should become skilled jobs. It's how do you incentivize on a tiny budget? And as I say, things like free tea and coffee, decent breaks. You buy them a pizza when we've had a great week, or you buy them a burger bun from the local van. They're small things, but they actually make a difference. It's like Nicole, it was her birthday this week. So she's a certain side of the city. So I got a cake that was the opposite color from that side of the city. It was a laugh. Everybody had a giggle. They all know how indoctrinated in her sport she is. So we could all have a laugh. And as I say, it's these small things make such a difference because employment can be so transactional. But we're working extended hours just now, and we just asked the staff could they do it, and we had a discussion amongst the team, and what we've done is we said, right, listen, we'll give you Christmas Eve off if you can work 8 extra hours in May because that's when we need you. Whereas on the 24th of December, we don't really need you, and you would take the holiday probably anyway. So, there's a lot of give and take, and that's really important because, it is hard work and it's very manual work. So, we can't pay massive wages because we're a small business. So, these things really help.
so what's the next big thing for you in your business, Ron? What do the next 1 to 3 years look like in terms of growth and opportunity and challenges? Like, what do you expect to face?
Well, I mean, we're facing some pretty tough headwinds just now in spirits. Spirits has had a shock to the system, but we are pretty well positioned because of our flexibility side. So, we are relatively unique in the fact that the questions, can you? The answer is always yes, we can. We find a way. So, we've built a great reputation on both quality, flexibility, but also the customer experience. So, as an example of MPD, if I show you this, which is called Snow Globe. Um, Basically, we were approached during lockdown by a company called Gravity Drinks about doing that product for them. And basically, I gave them a price and they said, oh, that's a bit too expensive. So um, they came back to me and they said, listen, we quite liked the way, you kind of sounded like you knew what you were talking about. Could you do this price? And I was actually making a cup of coffee at the time, and I said, "No, I don't think I can. Don't think I can. But leave it with me. I'll have a think about it." So I came back through to the office and sat down with my business partner. I said, "Listen, Gravy wants to do it for this price," and he said, "Well, actually, I think we can do it." So phoned the back and said, "Right, okay, we can do it for that price." Didn't have a clue how we were going to get gold leaf into a bottle, because with bottling you have what's called a final filter, which is 10 micron or less. 10 micron. Well, the human eye can see 30 microns, so 10 microns pretty neat. And I can assure you those gold leafs are more than 10 micron. So the management team at the time basically they got out an electric drill, a turkey baster, and they put like a mixing handle on. And what we worked out is the system to dose that amount of gold in every single bottle a lot of times. So we developed that process. So we did that 60,000 bottle run during lockdown. And again, my sister was working here. She was an accountant. She was in furlough. So she came in and helped out. My nephew's girlfriend came and worked. She was an air stewardess. So she was, again, not working at the time. And, we had a squad of people to do it right onto pallet into Costco, blew off the shelves, right? So that small conversation of do you think you can do it to yes we can then grew to 380,000 bottles the next year and 250,000 miniatures like that. So it was like an absolute hockey stick. And that was about the flexibility. Again, we talked about the Isla Harris. Again, that was very different. It was bringing people on board, but bringing people into the fold, if you will, and being invited into their fold. So, as I say, again, not transactional, very much involved with each other, but in a different way, in that we were not sort of finding a way to do it. We were basically enabling them to focus on whiskey, which, is a very important element. And the Isla Harris bottle is a challenge in itself. It's beautiful, but it is a challenge. You've got a very small label panel that you have to hit, and they have a very, very high quality threshold. Um, literally millimeter measurements, because they are lovingly, managing that brand. But I mean, again, a bottle you may recognize that we now do as well, AU 5CLs. They basically came and saw us and said, listen, we're just about going to America. We don't know what these numbers are going to be like. And, can you help us? Of course we can. But we'd never done PET bottle before. So we had to test it. So we tested it, and our fillers can handle it because they're low vac fillers. So, again, from do you think you can do it to doing it? I mean, we'll probably hit 1.5 million miniatures this year for them. So, again, it's kind of that becoming part of the furniture is really important in business to business, So it's not just, as I talk about transactional, you're not just a supplier, you're part of the supply chain. Yeah. So we'll have a weekly call with AU. We had a weekly call regularly with Isla Harris. You know, the whiskey companies we deal with, some of our customers, Billy Walker, who owns Glenallachie, he's been in whiskey for 50 years. And he came in, he saw us, and he looked around. He brought his bottling manager, Sharon, in, and he kind of went, "Oh yeah, oh, this is a good setup, Ron. Well done." Thanks very much, Billy. That's really good of you. Didn't hear another peep, and then there was a customer in the following week, and saying and chatting away again. It was a whiskey client, independent bottler, and we were having a conversation, and said, "Oh yeah," I said, I was actually quite proud. Billy Walker was actually in here last week. He said, quite impressed by ourselves. And the customer said, "Oh, just glad you said that." I said, "Why is that?" He says, "That's my dad. It was Alistair Walker, his son." So fortunately, fortunately, we ended up with both pieces of business.
Right.
But again, we're very much part of their supply chain. They do 13 single casts with us, and I mean this is really top end single malt whiskey. So it's
Mm.
really really very, very high quality, high value items. And you really have to take care of them. It's not about speed, it is about care and attention.
Yeah.
And that is really important. But again, we always say that nothing leaves our building that we're not happy with. So we're the judge of our quality. And if it doesn't hit our quality, it doesn't matter whether it's selling for 10 quid or 10,000 quid, it does not leave this place. It just does not leave.
Well, Ron, we're coming up to the end of our time. But before we finish, clearly you've had a lot of learnings, a lot of you've faced a lot of challenges, you've had a lot of success on your entrepreneurial journey. What would be the one piece of advice you would give would-be business owners or new business owners who are just starting out on their own or who are considering going out on their own?
Um, I would say ask for help. Okay. And I say this to my kids all the time. See if you ask somebody for help, right? It would take a particularly hard-hearted person to say no.
Hmm.
They will invariably try and say yes, right? So we've built a really strong business with really good suppliers because we ask them for help. So our filter supplier who actually door knocked us, basically, again, if I go back to the snow globe example, they wanted that liquid, which is actually a gin liqueur, so it's quite hazy. They wanted that as crystal clear as it could possibly do it. So I sat down with the supplier and they said, "Listen, change the type of filter to this type of filter and you'll get a better result." And you end up with that virtuous circle of customers happy, nice clear liquid, suppliers happy because they're selling us more product, and I'm happy because I sell more product too. So as I say, the one piece of advice is ask for help. Think back to that conversation I had with business partner Adrian in October 2019. I was asking for help. I'd never started a business. I had a business plan. I wanted a critique on it, and he ended up as my business partner.
Yeah. Excellent.
Okay.
That's a good piece of advice. The reason I went quiet there is I'm actually just contemplating this, and I'm thinking about some of the people in my life who need to hear this story. So, really, really good. Surround yourself with good people, good suppliers, good team, and then lean on them for their help and advice. But you're also sharing your own
But I
expertise.
mean,
You,
again,
some,
but again, in a simplistic way, we need to work this weekend. So we have to ask people to work this weekend.
yeah,
If they say no, Adrian and I could come in, but two people can't do what 10 people need to do. So you ask them for help. And, we've got a team of 22, so we need 50% of them to say yes.
yeah,
Um, and, we're fortunate they have. But, again, we ask for help. We don't, we obviously pay them and they get extra time. But you know what I mean? They still, even for extra time, they don't need to do it.
exactly. Yeah. Well, look, it sounds like exciting times ahead, Ron. Um, Thank you very much for sharing your story. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. We wish you
And
all
you?
the best for the future. Look forward to seeing what happens, right? Seeing it all unfold.
Well, we just put a new tank farm in, so that's the next stage. So hopefully tankers arriving every week.
Yeah. Well, look, we've been speaking with Ron Young on the Founders Chair podcast. I've been Andy Goldberg, and thanks very much to all of our listeners for tuning in as you do. And we'll see you all again real soon. Ron, thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks a lot, Andy.